If you look at um, a giant hulking desktop computer from the 1990s,
Mm.
with the heavy heat-generating monitor and that really loud humming tower fan,
Yeah.
you immediately recognize it as a machine designed to process information.
Oh, absolutely. The beige
Like
box.
a classic beige box. It looks like it's doing heavy lifting. It takes up half the desk. It requires a tangle of thick cables,
Mm-hmm.
and it just projects this undeniable physical presence of computing power.
Yeah, we have been culturally conditioned to equate physical mass with processing capacity. When we see a massive structure with spinning hard drives, we just inherently understand that work is being done.
But then, you hold a sleek, modern smartphone in the palm of your hand,
Yeah.
and it's entirely silent.
And incredibly light.
Exactly. It has no visible moving parts. If you handed it to someone from a century ago, they might just assume it's like a shiny piece of polished glass or a pocket mirror.
They'd have no idea what it was.
Right. You definitely wouldn't assume, just by looking at its small monolithic form, that it houses a million times more processing power than that giant beige tower from the 90s.
Well, because it utilizes a completely different architecture. The components have been miniaturized and hyper-optimized.
Yeah.
It does more with less, which completely breaks our intuitive bias that bigger always means smarter or more powerful.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that smartphone analogy is the perfect lens for today's mission. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are drawing from Jennifer Ackerman's meticulously researched book, The Genius of Birds.
It's a fantastic book.
It really is. And our goal today is to completely rewire how you think about intelligence. We are going to shatter the cultural myth of the bird brain and explore how creatures separated from mammals by over 300 million years of evolution managed to develop genius-level intellects.
Using a biological framework we barely recognize,
Ex-
it really requires a massive paradigm shift. I mean, for centuries, human language has been loaded with subtle and, well, not so subtle insults based on the assumption that birds are just empty-headed flying automatons.
Oh, for sure. We call people a bird brain or a lame duck or a dodo.
Right.
We have this ingrained mammalian bias that because birds are small and because we occasionally see a pigeon walk in a circle or a robin fly into a window pane, they must be operating on basic hardwired instinct.
We are essentially judging the sleek, silent smartphone for not looking like the giant, loud desktop computer.
That is exactly it. To reverse this bias, we have to look at the edge cases that completely broke the mammalian monopoly on intelligence, starting with the species that forced behavioral scientists to rewrite the textbooks.
Yeah, and the turning point for many researchers was the famous African gray parrot, Alex. He worked for decades with the cognitive scientist Irene Pepperbird.
Such a famous case.
Oh, incredibly famous. Before Alex, the scientific consensus was that birds were capable of mimicry at best. They were just organic tape recorders.
Right, just repeating what they hear.
Exactly. But Pepperbird's decades of rigorous testing dismantled that entirely. Before Alex passed away at age 31, he hadn't just memorized human sounds. He had mastered a vocabulary of hundreds of English labels for objects, materials, colors, and shapes.
And he wasn't just matching shapes either. He was actively categorizing them and doing mathematics.
Yes, actual math.
Like if Pepperberg showed him a tray cluttered with random multicolored objects and asked a highly specific question like, how many green keys?
He could answer it.
Yeah, Alex could visually scan the array, actively ignore the orange keys and the green corks, which, requires filtering out irrelevant data, and provide the correct numerical answer.
He was demonstrating selective attention and quantitative reasoning. He even grasped a zero-like concept.
Wait, really? A bird understood zero?
Yeah. In the animal kingdom, zero is a notoriously difficult concept to master because it requires understanding the abstraction of an absence.
Oh, right. You were asking a brain to quantify nothingness.
Exactly, and Alex could do that. He was even learning to sound out words phonetically, breaking down the sounds of NUT, much like a kindergartner learning the mechanics of reading.
That is just wild. He was communicating with true, intentional cogency. It completely recontextualizes his final words to Pepperberg before he died.
Which were so touching.
Yeah, they were, "You be good, I love you." That is not a tape recorder playing back a random soundbite. That is an organism expressing a relational concept.
It really is, but vocalization is just one avenue of intelligence. Physical engineering and spatial reasoning are entirely different arenas.
Which brings us to the corvid family, specifically the New Caledonian crows.
Oh, the corvids. Crows, ravens, jays, they are essentially the avian Ivy League. On the island of New Caledonia in the South Pacific, these crows naturally fashion their own specialized tools from pandanus leaves.
They don't just use found objects, though, right?
No, they manufacture them. They actually cut serrated edges into the leaves to fish out grubs. And furthermore, they transmit these highly specific, local styles of tool making from generation to generation.
So they are passing down a rudimentary form of physical culture.
Exactly. But the true extent of their engineering capability was demonstrated by a specific crow nicknamed 007.
Great name.
Right. The researcher Alex Taylor designed an 8-step puzzle for 007 that looks like, well, a miniature tabletop escape room.
8 steps. That sounds complicated even for a person.
Oh, it is. And 007 had never seen these specific elements arranged in this configuration before. It involved a short stick hanging from a string, a series of stones trapped inside individual boxes,
Okay.
a longer stick locked inside a transparent box mounted on a seesaw mechanism, and finally a piece of meat tucked deep inside a narrow tube.
Wow. So how did he get the meat?
To get the meat, 007 had to execute a sequence of actions that offered literally no immediate reward. So he flies down, assesses the visual layout, and goes straight to work. He pulls up the string to retrieve the short stick.
But he couldn't use the short stick to reach the meat.
Right, exactly. So he uses that short stick to ferret 3 separate stones out of their respective boxes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He then carries those stones in his beak, one by one, and drops them down a chute onto the seesaw. The accumulated weight of the 3 stones tips the seesaw, releasing the long stick.
And then he grabs the long stick.
He grabs the long stick, walks over to the final tube, and fishes out the meat. The entire 8-step process took him 2.5 minutes.
The critical detail here from the sources is this concept known as meta-tool use.
Yes, meta-tool use.
Because 007 used a tool, the short stick, not to get food directly, but to acquire another non-food object, the stones.
Exactly.
He then used the stones to acquire yet another non-food object, the long stick,
Uh-huh.
recognizing that an inedible object can be utilized as a stepping stone to manipulate another object requires a profound layer of abstract understanding.
It does. The crow has to visualize a future state of the puzzle that does not currently exist.
Right.
It demands an intense degree of what we call working memory. Working memory is the cognitive ability to hold multiple disparate facts in your mind and manipulate them over a short period to solve an active problem.
So 007 had to keep the ultimate goal, the meat, active in his working memory, while meticulously executing all these completely unrelated intermediate steps.
Yes. And until we observed these corvids, evolutionary biologists largely assumed that meta-tool use and advanced working memory were exclusive to the prefrontal cortex of primates and humans.
To really ground what that working memory feels like for you listening, think about the mental gymnastics you have to perform when you're trying to log into a secure website.
Oh, the 2-factor authentication.
Exactly. You receive a 2-factor authentication code texted to your phone. You have to hold that random, meaningless 6-digit number in your active memory while simultaneously pulling out your wallet, finding your credit card, reading those numbers.
And typing both sets of data into a browser before the login screen times out.
Yes, that friction you feel in your brain, that is your working memory hitting its limits. 007 is performing a physical, multi-layered version of that 2FA process, planning 8 steps ahead without a mammalian cortex.
It's incredible. But 007's flawless tabletop performance actually introduces a massive methodological problem for scientists.
How so?
Well, if you can only prove high-level intelligence by building bespoke physical escape rooms for individual prodigy birds in a laboratory setting, how do you accurately measure the intelligence of the other 10,000 bird species living in the wild?
Oh, I see. You can't exactly put a penguin or an ostrich through a tabletop seesaw puzzle and expect a valid result.
Exactly. There is no standardized universal SAT test for the avian world.
That makes sense.
This is the exact wall that researcher Louis Lefebvre hit at the Bellairs Research Institute in Barbados. He wanted to figure out a metric for avian cognitive abilities, so he utilized a natural experiment happening right outside his lab.
With the 2 local birds, right?
Yes, he focused on 2 very common local species, the Barbados bullfinch and the black-faced grassquit.
Now, from a genetic and evolutionary standpoint, these 2 birds are virtual twins. They share a recent common ancestor. They diverged only a couple million years ago. They navigate the exact same Caribbean island environment, and they operate within the same social structures.
Yet their behavioral paradigms are polar opposites. The bullfinch has adapted an opportunistic, bold survival strategy.
They're the ones hanging around the cafes.
Right. They are fearless scavengers. They have even learned to identify paper sugar packets on tables, flip them over, pierce a hole in the paper, and eat the sugar.
That is brilliant.
Meanwhile, the grass squid, sharing that exact same environment, is highly timid. It stays in the brush, keeps its head down, pecks at naturally occurring grass seeds, and is deeply suspicious of anything novel.
So Lefebvre's team brings these genetic twins into lab to compare their processing power. They place a food reward inside a transparent cylinder equipped with a removable lid, which is an object completely foreign to both species.
And what happens is fascinating. The bullfinches immediately approach the cylinder, begin pecking at it, accidentally nudge the lid, realize it moves, and systematically pop it off to get the food. One bullfinch solved the puzzle in 7 seconds.
7 seconds. But what about the grass squids?
Out of 15 grass squids tested in the exact same scenario, not a single one even approached the cylinder. They remained frozen, entirely unwilling to engage with the novel object.
Now wait, let me push back here. If you look strictly at the results of that cylinder test, the bullfinch is the valedictorian, and the grass squid is failing out of school.
That's what the data says initially.
But basic logic tells us that if the grass squid fails all these tests and is so afraid of everything, shouldn't it be extinct? I mean, is it actually dumb, or is our test just biased?
That is the perfect question, and it's exactly what led the researchers to deploy a completely different metric called reversal learning.
Reversal learning.
Yeah. It doesn't test how fast an animal engages with a puzzle. It tests cognitive flexibility, how quickly an animal can unlearn an established rule and adapt to a contradictory one.
Okay, how do they test that?
They presented the birds with 2 cups, one yellow and one green. The yellow cup contained edible seed. The green cup contained glued down, inedible seed.
So both species eventually learn that yellow equals food. They establish a neurological dopamine pathway rewarding them for choosing yellow.
Exactly. Once that rule was established, the researchers secretly swapped the contents. Now, the green cup offered the reward, and the yellow cup offered nothing.
Oh, that's tricky.
Very. To succeed, the bird has to experience the frustration of a failed expectation, suppress its established habit, and forge a new neurological pathway.
And this is where the dynamic completely flips, right?
It completely flips. The bold bullfinches who solved the cylinder in seconds struggled with the reversal. They aggressively kept going back to the empty yellow cup.
Oh.
But the timid grass squirts, they took much longer to approach the cups initially, but once they recognized the rule change, they adapted faster and ultimately made fewer mistakes than the bullfinches.
So their inherent caution actually translates to higher accuracy when the environment becomes unpredictable.
Exactly. The fast solution of the bullfinch opening the cylinder isn't necessarily a moment of profound insight. It's not a sudden, complex visualization of mechanics.
It's just highly attentive trial and error driven by a complete lack of fear.
Right. The grass squid possesses the exact same raw brain power, but its evolutionary survival strategy is extreme caution. Our standardized lab tests were inadvertently rewarding fearless opportunism while penalizing methodical caution.
Making the grass squid look mathematically dull.
Precisely. Because laboratory settings are so easily skewed by a species' inherent personality traits, scientists realized they needed a completely different approach.
Right. They needed an ecological measure of intelligence. Instead of forcing birds to solve human-designed puzzles in a sterile room, they needed to observe how birds organically innovate in the wild to secure calories and survive.
Yes. The primatologist Jane Goodall had actually championed this approach years prior, arguing that true intelligence is an organism finding a novel solution to an environmental problem in its natural habitat.
So Lefebvre builds on this with a remarkably unconventional idea. He decides to scour 75 years of published ornithological journals, specifically looking for anecdotes.
Which is wild because historically, behavioral science dismissed single anecdotes of weird animal behavior as unscientific flukes.
Right, but Lefebvre realized that if you systematically compile thousands of these specific peer-reviewed observations from across the globe, you stop looking at flukes and start generating a massive, quantifiable dataset of innovation.
It is the scientific equivalent of compiling a massive ledger of extreme survival hacks.
Like compiling a viral Reddit thread of extreme bird life hacks.
Yes, exactly like that. He extracted over 2,300 documented examples of novel behaviors across hundreds of species. and the level of sophistication is staggering.
The source material highlights some incredible adaptations,
Mhm.
like bald eagles in Arizona figuring out how to ice fish by chipping holes in frozen lakes, and then literally jumping up and down on the ice sheet to force dead minnows to float up to the surface.
That is just brilliant.
Or gray kingbirds, which are genetically wired to catch flying insects out of the air, completely altering their hunting protocol to swoop down, snatch stranded guppies out of shallow puddles, and hammer them against branches to tenderize them.
And consider the great skuas in the Antarctic. They learn to embed themselves among pods of newborn seal pups, camouflaging their presence so they could drink nutrient-dense milk directly from the lactating mother seals.
Unbelievable. But perhaps the most stark example of ecological intelligence involves vultures in Zimbabwe.
Oh, the vultures. This example perfectly illustrates causal reasoning over blind instinct.
Yes. During wartime in Zimbabwe, vast tracts of land were cordoned off with barbed wire to enclose active minefields, and vultures, which are scavengers constantly scanning for carrion, began intentionally roosting on these specific barbed wire fences.
Which, to be clear, is not a hardwired instinct. It is a learned adaptation based on observing a sequence of events.
Right.
The vulture observes a Kaza gazelle wandering into the enclosed area and stepping on a specific patch of dirt. It observes the explosive effect. It then identifies the reward, a freshly pulverized meal.
It's so morbid, but so smart.
It really is. The vulture then projects that causal sequence into the future, fundamentally altering its daily routine to wait by these specific fences, anticipating the caloric windfall of military explosives.
So when Lefebvre categorized all these thousands of anecdotes by bird family, he successfully created an avian innovation index, a true IQ scale for the wild.
And the results were very revealing. At the very top, demonstrating the highest rates of flexible, novel problem solving, were the corvids, the crows and ravens, alongside parrots and woodpeckers.
And at the bottom of the innovation scale, relying almost entirely on hardwired instinct, were species like emus, quails, and ostriches.
So we have undeniable, codified proof that species like crows and parrots are executing complex cognitive tasks.
But this brings us to the ultimate biological paradox.
Yeah.
How are they physically processing these advanced computations? I mean, mammalian intelligence relies on massive, heavy folds of cerebral cortex.
Right. Our big, heavy brains.
Exactly. So how is a bird pulling off these feats of general cognition with a brain the size of a walnut, or in some cases, a pea?
To understand the physical architecture of the bird brain, we have to examine the biological toll of their defining feature, which is flight.
Because flying is an incredibly energy-intensive mechanism.
Oh, massively. A small finch simply flapping its wings burns almost 30 times its basal metabolic resting energy. To make sustained flight physically possible, evolution had to aggressively strip out every ounce of heavy hardware from the avian body.
Everything was sacrificed for lightness.
Everything. Birds lack heavy teeth and jaws, utilizing a lightweight terratin beak instead. They don't have bladders to store liquid weight.
Their livers are reduced to a fraction of a gram.
Yes. Their bones are pneumatic, meaning they are largely hollow, structurally reinforced with tiny internal struts like the steel beams of a bridge so they don't shatter under aerodynamic pressure.
They even compress their cellular blueprint. The sources mention that birds have the smallest genomes of any land-dwelling egg layers because, over millions of years, they selectively deleted repetitive junk DNA sequences just to shave off microscopic amounts of weight and cellular energy demand.
Exactly. And because the avian body ruthlessly discarded anything heavy or metabolically expensive, human biologists naturally assumed that higher intelligence was discarded as well.
Right, because brain tissue is incredibly dense.
It is. It consumes a massive amount of metabolic energy, second only to the heart. The assumption was that birds simply did not have the biological budget to support a complex brain.
But the fossil record from the Jehol beds in China tells a completely different story about how their brains evolved.
It does. The Jehol beds preserve the ancestors of modern birds, which are living theropod dinosaurs.
Which is still so crazy to think about.
I know, but around 150 million years ago, a specific lineage of bipedal theropods entered an evolutionary phase called sustained miniaturization.
Okay, what does that mean?
Over the course of 50 million years, they continuously shrank, evolving from massive terrestrial predators weighing hundreds of pounds down to nimble creatures weighing less than 2 pounds.
Wow. And this extreme downsizing allowed them to occupy new ecological niches, climb trees to escape predators, and eventually develop the aerodynamics to glide and fly.
But here is the critical divergence.
Right.
While their skeletal and muscular systems shrank drastically, their brains did not shrink at the same proportional rate.
How did they manage that?
The mechanism allowing this is a fascinating evolutionary process known as paedomorphosis.
Paedomorphosis, which translates roughly to child formation.
Right.
In a typical dinosaur life cycle, as a juvenile grew into a mature adult, its body would expand massively, its snout would elongate, and its face would change shape, but its brain cavity wouldn't grow proportionally.
Think of the classic Stegosaurus, a multi-ton body driven by a tiny, disproportionate head.
Right. But the theropod ancestors of birds altered this developmental trajectory.
They essentially hit the pause button on cranial development. They evolved to retain their babyish, juvenile skull shapes even as they reached full sexual maturity.
They kept the giant bulbous heads and the massive eyes typical of infants, while the rest of their skeletal body shrank away.
And by retaining that juvenile cranial volume on a miniaturized body, they preserved an enormous brain capacity relative to their total weight.
But the physical size of the brain isn't the whole story, is it? It is the density of the wiring.
Exactly. A bird's brain doesn't have the layered cortex of a mammal. Instead, their neurons are packed together in dense clusters.
Like a compressed microchip.
Yes. In some avian species, the density of these neural networks rivals or even exceeds the neuron density found in the brains of primates.
So they evolved a hyper-efficient, miniaturized processor. And the most staggering example of this hyper-dense architecture in action is the black-capped chickadee.
Oh, the chickadee.
This is a bird that weighs roughly 12 grams. Its brain weighs zero point 0.6 grams, literally the size of a green pea. Yet this creature possesses a spatial memory that puts mammals to shame.
The chickadee survives freezing winters by caching or hiding individual seeds in thousands of different locations across its territory.
Thousands.
Thousands. With a brain the size of a pea, it utilizes an enlarged avian hippocampus to map a complex three-dimensional forest environment, remembering the exact spatial coordinates of individual seeds for up to 6 months.
That is just baffling. And aside from their prodigious spatial mapping, chickadees have developed one of the most sophisticated communication systems of any land animal.
It operates far beyond a simple distress cry. It is a true language governed by a distinct syntax.
We are talking about the familiar chickadee call.
Right. They utilize different vocalizations to communicate highly specific data about environmental threats. A high-pitched, almost ultrasonic seat call indicates an active, flying threat passing overhead.
And the lower chickadee call.
That one is reserved for stationary predators, like an owl perched in a nearby tree. And the brilliant mechanism of the syntax is how they calibrate the threat level. They alter the number of Ds at the end of the call to indicate the precise size of the predator.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. The sources point out that more Ds actually indicates a smaller predator. Wait, why would a tiny pygmy owl trigger a frantic alarm call with 4 or 5 Ds, while a massive, imposing great horned owl only warrants 2 Ds? Doesn't bigger mean deadlier?
Well, we equate size with danger because of our own physical vulnerability, but a chickadee is analyzing the physics of the threat.
Okay, walk me through that.
A massive great horned owl is immensely powerful, but its wingspan makes it cumbersome in a dense forest canopy. A small predator, like a pygmy owl, has a much tighter turning radius and a lower stall speed.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it is incredibly agile and can easily maneuver through thick branches to hunt a small bird.
So it is entirely about maneuverability. It's like spotting an incoming threat. If you are flying a nimble little aircraft and you spot a massive, slow-moving cargo plane in the airspace, it's huge, but it cannot outmaneuver you in a direct dogfight.
You can easily evade it.
Right. But if you spot a tiny, highly maneuverable fighter jet locking onto your position, that is an immediate, lethal threat that demands an urgent response.
That is a perfect analogy. The chickadee is visually calculating the aerodynamic capability of the predator, encoding that physical data into a syntactic vocalization, and broadcasting it across the forest canopy.
So other birds can assess the risk and gather to aggressively mob the threat.
Exactly. They are executing rapid threat assessment mathematics with a processor that weighs less than a paperclip.
When we pull all of these threads together, Alex the parrot doing abstract mathematics, the New Caledonian crow visualizing multi-step engineering, the vultures deducing cause and effect in a minefield, and the chickadees using syntactic language to broadcast aerodynamic threat data. What does this reveal about the nature of intelligence itself?
It reveals that intelligence is not a singular mammalian invention. What we are observing in birds is a masterpiece of convergent evolution.
Convergent evolution, right?
Humans and birds last shared a common ancestor over 300 million years ago, long before the dinosaurs. We are mammals, and they are the sole surviving lineage of theropod dinosaurs. We evolved our processing power using entirely different physical blueprints.
Our brains rely on expansive layered sheets of cerebral cortex. Their brains rely on hyperdense, clustered neural nodes packed into lightweight skulls.
Yet nature used these two vastly divergent biological architectures to arrive at the exact same sophisticated endpoints. Complex problem solving, abstract spatial reasoning, cultural transmission, and syntactic language.
They really are our cognitive peers. They're operating on a parallel track of evolutionary genius, achieving primate-level intellect through an entirely different structural pathway.
It completely dismantles our assumption that intelligence has to look, sound, or be structured like us in order to be profound.
So think about this. The next time you are sitting on a park bench and you see a pigeon navigating a crowded sidewalk, or you hear the complex syntax of a chickadee calling out from the tree line.
You're not looking at a primitive bird brain driven by simple reflex.
No, you are literally observing a highly optimized featherweight dinosaur
Yeah.
constantly performing complex environmental calculus just to survive the afternoon. And it leaves you with a deeply provocative thought to explore on your own.
What's that?
Well, if biology right here on Earth can build primate-level intelligence using completely foreign physical architectures, like these tiny hyperdense paedomorphic dinosaur brains, what does this imply for our search for intelligence elsewhere in the universe?
Oh, that's a fascinating point.
Right. When we point telescopes at the stars searching for alien life, or when we sit in laboratories trying to engineer artificial general intelligence, we intuitively assume that true consciousness will think like a human mammal.
We're always scanning the horizon for the giant humming desktop computer.
Exactly. But perhaps the universe is actually teeming with profound intelligence that looks and thinks a whole lot more like a crow.